And today I'm going to give a talk about connecting the dots between the water food nexus and human health. And thank you for coming here, of course, today. So just to set the scene, one of the main challenges we are facing nowadays is to feed a growing population that is expected to be around 10 billion people in 2050. These people is demanding for additional food, additional energy, and so additional agricultural land. And this additional food is expected to be in 60% in terms of food consumption, 60% in terms of energy consumption, 20% in terms of water withdrawal, and around 33% in agricultural area. Additional challenges are related to the eradication of malnutrition that is represented by undernutrition, macronutrient deficiency, but also overnutrition, that in turn affect people with food, the so-called food-related diseases. Moreover, we are observing that some countries are becoming more affluent, are following the so-called Bennett law. So sometimes over increasing meat consumption at the expenses of their health, of course, but also the health of the environment. We are also observing, and also we are also observing due to the last, not the last pandemics, but the pandemic we have now, that also the emerging infectious diseases are increasing. And these emerging infectious diseases are mostly of zoonotic origins, meaning that their origin is from animal. And it means that there is a sort of increasing the encroachment of humans in the wild habitat. And this encroachment sometimes is due to the unsustainable food system and unsustainable agriculture. If we look to the history of food security and to the food security debate, what we can see is that this history shows us that the question of feeding a growing population is not new. In fact, at the end of the 18th century, Thomas Malthus analyzed the growing population and the natural resources available for feeding the population. And from his analysis, what he discovered was that in the long run, the natural resources would be not enough for feeding the growing population, the so-called Malthusian catastrophe. We didn't have the Malthusian catastrophe, and Esther Boserup ascribed the fact that we didn't have the Malthusian catastrophe to the technological innovations, because thanks to these innovations we were able to produce more food than expected, and these innovations were mainly the mechanization of agriculture from one hand, and then the discoveries of the green revolution. And it's because these technological innovations that food security became not a problem of food production, so of food availability, but it became a problem of food access, as pointed out by Amartya Sen in his very famous essay, Poverty and Famine. So what we can say is that the question, how many people can the planet feed, is still relevant, especially if we consider that the food we are producing sometimes is produced in an unsustainable way. If we look to the main strategies for increasing food production, these strategies, the main two strategies, are the agriculture intensification and the agriculture extensification. Agriculture intensification means increasing the agricultural yield, so closing the so-called yield gap in the underperforming lands. Usually the yield gap can be closed by increasing irrigation and also by increasing fertilizers, so giving to the plants what the plants needs in terms of water and in terms of nutrients. Expanding, extensify agriculture means expanding the cultivated area, keeping constant the agricultural yield. Both the two strategies has environmental negative effects. The agricultural intensification can translate in the transition from smallholder farming to commercial agriculture, can translate in the loss of livelihood, in water resources depletion and land degradation. But also the agricultural extensification, if it does not imply an additional use of water and fertilizers, it can have very negative effects connected to land use change, and so deforestation and biodiversity losses. This is why the ecologists usually advocate for intensification rather than extensification of agriculture. And the main reason why is because intensification avoids habitat destruction and land use change less than extensification. We try to calculate with some of our students, Maya and Paolo, and we try to calculate how many people can be fed through the intensification of the global agriculture. And what we found in this analysis was that we, by intensifying agriculture, so by closing the agricultural yield gap, mainly using water rather than fertilizers, we are able to produce food to feed around 4 billion people around the world. Here you can see some scenarios of our calculation. But the question is, okay, we are able to produce food for additional 4 billion people with respect to the people we are now, but the question is, do we have the natural resources to sustainably feed the humanity, to sustainably feed these additional 4 billion people? And or are we running out of natural resources to sustainably meet energy and food needs? And in fact, looking to the hotspot of unsustainable water use around the globe, we see that there are more than one hotspot. There are many hotspots of unsustainable water use. We have hotspots in the United States, in the northern Great Plains, and then we have hotspots in India, both in the south east and in southwest, in the northern east. Then we have also some hotspots also in Europe and of course in South Africa. So in order to move from the additional 4 billion people that we can feed, closing the gap, but sometimes this closure is unsustainable, to the sustainable closure, we repeat our analysis, and then Paolo, we will show you in detail what we have done in this analysis. And so what we did was, with the framework of water scarcity, at first we analyzed when water scarcity is a physical water scarcity and when water scarcity is an economical water scarcity. And so we determine the areas at global scale where it is possible to make a sustainable intensification. And what we discovered was that we moved from the 4 billion people, from the production of food to feed additional 4 billion people, we decrease to 2 billion people if we apply, if the irrigation, if the water we give as irrigation to the plants is given in a sustainable way. And then, if we look to the present irrigated area, we discovered that some of the currently irrigated area are irrigated in an unsustainable way. And so we decrease to 1.8 billion people that it is possible to feed in a sustainable way. Close to, in addition to that we can call them environmental effects of intensification, there are also other type of effects that intensification can produce that are social effects, social issues. In fact, in the last 15 years, we have observed the phenomenon of large-scale land acquisitions that negatively is called land and water grabbing. So what happened was that very large tracts of lands were acquired around the globe, and now it has been acquired a quantity of land that is 3 times the area of Portugal. Just to give you the idea, just to give you an idea of a very large amount of land that has been acquired in the last 15 years. This land has been acquired in order to close sometimes mainly in order to close the yield gap. So in order to increase crop production. And the problem is that, okay, from one hand, intensifying agriculture in those lands, it is possible to produce more food. But the problem is that those lands are lands that are already used by indigenous people, by people living in those lands that are sometimes also suffering of malnutrition. And when investors cultivate those lands, they usually bring back to the investor country what is produced in this land. And so associated to the cultivation of this land, there is the dispossession of the land itself. And so this is a very, very dangerous environmental effect associated to the intensification of agriculture. And Davide, later we will talk about this problem. Then we have another problem associated to intensification. That is the fact that using water for intensification can result in the competition for water use from different sectors. For example, from the food sectors and the energy sector. The energy sector, in fact, is predicted to increase the consumption of water, as you can see on the figure on the left side, and it is predicted to increase the use of water, especially if the sustainable development scenario of energy consumption is analyzed. So what can happen is the competition in the very, very near future from the energy sector and the food sector for the use of natural resources in general, but for the use of water in particular. And the reason why of this competition is because a nexus exists among food, water, and energy. And talking about nexus means that food, energy, and water system are based on the same pool of natural resources. So it means that an unsustainable use of a certain type of natural resources in this context of water can prevent the use of water for another sector. So just to give you an example, an unsustainable use of water, for example, for energy, can prevent the use of water for food, and so the feeding of humanity. Another example that I can give you about the use of water and the sometimes unsustainable use of water are the use of water for climate change mitigation strategies. You can see in this slide an exercise we carried out with some of our students, considering the afforestation and reforestation strategies related to the afforestation and afforestation and reforestation for aimed to decrease carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Of course, these type of strategies have pros and cons. Pros are due to the fact that through these strategies is possible to help fighting climate change by stocking carbon dioxide, and it is very important. It is what we aim to in this period. Then this type of strategies can be able to prevent land degradation, to improve the microclimate, to enhance precipitation in drylands, and sometimes can help to the reversal of the desertification. Cons are related to the fact that targeting zones are sometimes arid and hyper-arid regions, usually already affected by water scarcity, and also other cons are related to the competition for natural resources, in particular water, among the other sectors that are in the same place. Also, we have to consider that downstream effects can arise due to the use of water for growing this type of plants. In this exercise, what we did was that we based on the map of the areas suitable for afforestation, given by the paper of Basten et al. 2020, published on Science, and we analyzed if it is possible to make deforestation and afforestation in the areas suggested by Basten. So at first, by analyzing those areas, what we observed was that in Africa and Oceania there are areas potentially available for tree planting from the Basten map, there are arid and semi-arid areas, and so part of these areas can be exposed to water stress. By contrary, in South America and Asia, there are humid areas that are more prone to be planted. By doing some simulations considering to plant trees on the area suggested by Basten, we observed that yearly water scarcity induced by tree plantation would affect around the 77% of the feasible net restoration area, both in Oceania and South America, while in Asia and Africa the 22% and 24% of suitable areas would undergo water scarcity. So meaning that water can be the real limiting factor also on climate change, on strategies for decreasing climate change effects. So it means that we have to pay attention also when some climate change, when strategies for decreasing climate change effects are proposed, because we have to check if there is water available to put in place some strategies. Just to conclude, I want to show this, what is following. So agriculture, of course, is one of the main drivers of land use change, and in this very interesting map, it is reported the main driver of land use change. I want to show you that the nexus I talked about before, related to the food, energy, and water nexus, can be also extended to health. And it can be extended to health in particular because the land use change. In fact, the unsustainable land use change in response to an increasing demand of food can increase the proximity of human and wild habitat. It is what happened with the agricultural expansion that occurred in many places in the world, that implied deforestation and forest fragmentation. But unfortunately, it happened not only with agricultural expansion, but also with agricultural intensification. Because agricultural intensification can bring livestock very close to, not only can bring both livestock and agriculture very close to the wild habitat. And due to this land use change, what happened regarding the wild habitat is that usually the animals that are able to survive are the so-called generalist animals. So animals that are able to adapt well to disturbed habitats. We try to see what happened regarding the coronavirus. So what we did was an exercise like this. We analyzed an area very big, more than 28 million kilometers. That is the area where the rhinophyte bats, that is the putative bat hosting the coronavirus, live. In this area, what we studied at very high resolution was forest cover and forest losses. Then we studied croplands, we studied livestock density, 5 types of livestock density, then we study population density, and also settlements. We calculated, starting from forest cover and forest losses, forest fragmentation, and then we carried out a multivariate statistical analysis in order to analyze the hotspot and cold spot areas related to indicators of land use change and human and animal density. What we obtain, what you see here, and in red you have the hotspot areas that are hotspot of fragmentation, human density and livestock density simultaneously. And it can be observed that China, but not only China, we have also northeast India and southwest India, and some parts also in Italy and in France can be hotspot of these 3 indicators that are able to tell us that there is that the proximity between humans and wild habitat is really very, very high. And in Italy is in Pianura Padana, where we know very well that that there is high fragmentation, very high presence of livestock and humans. Also, we know that in China is more or less the same, and so those areas are areas where the surveillance need to be really very high. The last exercise we carried out related to this research was to look if there are some places where particular trajectories of land use change can bring from situation that now are not situation of hotspot to situation of hotspot. And there are many places on the area we analyze, and here you have an example represented, for example, from the triangle in pink, where you see that in the area, in the pink area, there is a situation where fragmentation is very high, but up to now, livestock and settlements, so livestock and density of humans, are not so high that the area can be considered as an hotspot. But if in this area we increase livestock and also humans, we can move from a situation like the situation we have now that is not hotspot to a situation that is hotspot. So a very dangerous situation. The triangle in green is another type of situation where we have very high density of livestock, and in this area, by increasing fragmentation and the presence of humans, we can move from a neutral situation to an hotspot. In the purple, the situation of risk is given by an increase in terms of settlements. So what we can say now by concluding is that even though global agricultural production we have now could be able to feed the planet, it does that not sustainably. So treating the environment, the global health, and also treating the future of humanity. So what we have to do is to put in place strategies towards sustainable food security, to perceive sustainable food production. So we have to perceive sustainable intensification if we want to increase food production, or what we can do is reduce food demand. We can reduce food demand by reducing waste, because if we reduce waste, we reduce food demand, and so water demand and nutrients demand. We can change our diet habit, so moving from natural resource highly demanding food to other type of food that are less natural resource demanding food, or we can move to circular economy. So by concluding, food and energy production have an impact both on environmental sustainability and also on human health, and we need now to combine the food, energy, water nexus perspective with the One Health paradigm. So from one hand we have to consider that the resources are interconnected, so a nexus exists among the resources, but then we have also to consider that the health of the environment, people and animals are interconnected. So I finished. Thank you very much.